2019 began a Star Wars reckoning. The utterly irredeemable Rise of Skywalker killed the franchise's movie prospects for a good long while. There was hope over on streaming with The Mandalorian, but then by 2022, a second reckoning had come to sweep away the goodwill garnered on Disney Plus with a 1-2 punch of Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I know they have their fans, but I was not one of them. After being let down so many times, fumbling the returns of both Boba and Obi felt like the killing blow. To make matters worse, the only thing on the horizon was Andor, a show that was somehow going to be twice as long as those shows, starring a secondary lead in a one-off movie. Andor. Freaking Andor. Who asked for this? After being so bitterly disappointed, I was not in the mood to watch that shit whatsoever. I tapped out of the wars fully for the first time in my life. By August 2022, the unthinkable happened. The reviews were in, the fans had spoken, Andor was good? Great even? And for several years people kept on telling me to watch it in my comments section. And it's not that I didn't believe anyone, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Disney Star Wars had burned me one too many times. I eventually thought to myself, I'll catch up on it before the next season comes out. Well, since we're in the era of TV where shows take 2 or even 3 freaking years to come out, that turned into a big gap. What in my head felt like a small window turned from 2022 to, well, now 2025. But nonetheless, I bit the bullet, or the laser, and finally dug into the first episode. And holy fucking shit, Andor is so good. Andor really is great. Andor is the Star Wars we've all been missing. I think the term masterpiece is thrown around all too easily, particularly with big franchise IP, but man, this is where you throw around that term. Tony Gilroy has crafted a Star Wars show that isn't afraid to take the material seriously. It breaks new ground with the franchise, deepens what we already knew, and if nothing else, gives us engrossing characters, tragedy, and tension-fueled exciting sequences. It shows us the true cost of rebellion and revolution, digging into how the galactic civil war was never just about good guys and bad guys, but about how much good people were willing to get their own hands dirty to usher in something brighter. In Andor, we see the inner workings and dealings of the Imperials we never spend any time with, what makes them tick, what makes them so terrifying. This show kept me aching for more, and to be quite honest, blew every single Star Wars streaming show out of the water. After giving us so many forgettable shows, Andor proves that Disney Star Wars should strive for quality over quantity. In particular, I thought the whole structure of the season was a masterstroke. Each arc is essentially broken up into 3 episodes, with a different driving force and different key characters in each segment. Everything is spun out of Andor murdering 2 cops in self-defense, kicking off a chain reaction leading up to his escape in episode 3. Episodes 4 to 6 deal with a heist on Aldhani, introducing us to new arc-specific characters that cut to the core of Andor and what he believes in. By Arc 3, there's a slight format break, wherein it lasts for 4 episodes rather than 3. We get some downtime with Andor in episode 7 before the twist that he is thrown in prison, where a 3-episode arc then plays out and finishes in time for a pacey 2-episode finale. It was just enough of a format break to chop things up, but still basically retained the idea that every trio would be its own thing. It gave the show a really propulsive feeling, yet didn't feel like it was merely 4 mini-seasons mashed together, because you had your long-form arcs and recurring leads with Luthen and Mon Mothma, or Bix back on Ferrix. Even the episode running times felt super deliberate. The first 3 episodes are all fairly short, clocking in well under an hour, helping to add to the feeling that the walls are closing in and the police are going to catch Cassian. It also helps to get you into the show, because you can easily blast past the first arc, and once you're at the heist episodes, you're knee deep in the Andor party, baby. The episodes then get longer and even more engrossing. The character work was just sublime. Sublime! Cyril Khan and Dedra Meero have a fascinating dichotomy. Cyril is an up-and-comer on the police force who cares so hard he's taken to tailoring his uniform. He's a loser obsessed with the ideals of justice and order, but he's still a dangerous loser, and his tenacity leads to Andor being tracked down. And then episode 3 sees him absolutely decimated. He can't galvanise the police who treat it like a job, unable to see that he's an outcast even amongst the people he sees as his brotherhoods. And then he fails so spectacularly that he gets fired and has to go home to Mummy. We meet Dedra Meero, in many ways everything Khan wishes he was. She believes in the cause of the Empire, but she's focused, cunning, and gets shit done. Of course she too gets served her humble pie in a moment that allows Khan to snake his way back into favour during the finale. I can't wait to see where this relationship goes, and how their belief systems are challenged going into season 2. Speaking of belief systems, Skarsgård's Luthen is a revolutionary in universe and in terms of what kind of character the series can create. He is perhaps the worst rebel we've ever met in the Star Wars world, but he has a point. He's willing to put aside his own morals and use the tools of his enemy in the hopes of one day beating them, even if he knows the enemy will outlast him. His speech about never seeing the sunrise in episode 10 is so damn good, emblematic of the entire series' knack for memorable but authentic dialogue. His decision to leave Anto Kreegyr to the wolves comes off callous and manipulative, but that is the cost of seeing the bigger picture. In my world, you gotta get dirty, so that's what I'm doing. Getting dirty. Cousin revealing after the heist that no, he did not in fact have a brother who was killed by the Empire, was only in it for the money, and pressed our lead by supposing that they are the same, that their allegiances can be bought, that none of this matters, was such a good heel turn. And then to have that met with no hesitation from Andor. What a brilliant mini arc. Kino Loy probably has the best redemption arc in the series since Anakin Skywalker. Introduced as a threat to Andor and the other prisoners, keeping them in line, unrelenting in his belief that if he plays by the rules and gets others to do the same, he will be free. After the utterly heartbreaking and really quite dark moments where Christopher Fairbanks' character suffers a fatal stroke, what a fucking payoff it is for Kino to tell Andor,
never more than 12.
No one is getting out, no one is listening, and the only way to be free is to risk dying for it. To then have this character's ending be that he must stay whilst everyone else gets to leave? Fantastic writing. I wonder if we will ever see him again, or if this is truly his final fate. Even things like the fact that Andor is discovered because of Tim's jealousy, the entire exhilarating third episode is built upon one character's drunken mistake. Thinking that Bix still wants Andor and would go to the would-be rebel over himself, he decides to rat him out. A fucking rat! He costs him everything, and his death has ripples for Bix across the rest of the show. Fucking rat. How could I gush about this show without gushing about the eponymous hero himself? I gave zero fucks about Andor after Rogue One, and it was shocking to me that he was getting his own show. Somehow, they not only got us to care, they not only got us to see him as three-dimensional, but they made his eventual death the trick shot for why this show is so compelling. His death in Rogue One echoes Luthen's ideals. None of them are making it out alive, and there's a good chance only a select few will see the victory they dream of. It is for others to enjoy, but wouldn't it be better to die facing the enemy, striking God, than giving in and letting the powers that be consolidate until there is truly nothing left? Andor goes from wanting to keep his head down to realising that is a fantasy. He can never escape the boot of the Empire no matter what he does, that every act he takes is one of revolution, and that he must commit, like Nemik, like Luthen, like Mon, if anything will ever change. He's gone from an absolute afterthought character to one that is more compelling than the Fetts and the Kenobis of the streaming era, and that is utterly insane. Oh, and the show looks fucking fantastic. Ditching the volume in lieu of real sets was a decision that leads to some really creative uses of locations across the UK. Sure, maybe a brick can tell a Blackpool beach or the Barbican amongst the sci-fi, but they blend the practical and the CG backdrops exceedingly well. Every world has a pulse, every set feels real, because it mostly is. It really is mad that this show not only keeps a consistent tone, never giving in to a Disney joke to ruin the pathos, gets to seriously dark and sad places, gives us nuance and fascinating character work, and still manages to look better than all those shows on top. This show is astounding. My only problem with Andor is a problem that loops back round to 2022, to 2019, really to everything about the entire Disney era. If Disney Star Wars can be this good with a spin-off character, why can't it be that good for the main saga? Why does it have to be a story that's an abstraction without lightsabers and the Force and the Sith and Mandalorians and crazy destinations? Why does it have to take place between trilogies? Why can't the premier story that has everything orbiting around it in the modern post-Lucas era be this compelling? Why couldn't we get a story about Luke's new Jedi Order with as much nuance as this? Why couldn't we have gotten sequel trilogy characters with as much depth as the one-off side characters of this show? I said earlier that Kino Loy has the best redemption arc in Star Wars since Anakin Skywalker, and I mean that. But why the hell isn't Ben Solo's arc up there? Why the hell does Andy Serkis's second Star Wars character get a better storyline? It feels like if we tackle the Force and the Jedi in the main saga, then we are almost not allowed to make it as nuanced as this show. It feels like Disney allowed Tony Gilroy to take it there with Andor precisely because it was off to the side, because it wasn't anything to do with a Kenobi or a Skywalker or Grogu. It is really great to see just how nasty and manipulative the Empire could be in the lead up to the original trilogy, and I know we can always jump around in time, but I think given the fact that we've seen the happy ending, we've seen the Empire squashed, wouldn't it have made more sense to put all of this story real estate into making the big bads of the sequels this deep and intimidating? The sequel trilogy should have made the First Order the desperate, burgeoning neo-Nazi faction they were painted as in broad strokes, with a writer like Gilroy at the helm to give them that menace and manipulation. That fervour and insidious core to the entire Empire across Andor. Why couldn't that have been the antagonistic force driving the premier story strand of the Disney era? Imagine if we'd have gotten the First Order as well rendered as this, with heroes to stand against them that were as three-dimensional and as tragic as this? Why couldn't we have gotten the politics and the dealings with Luthen and Mon Mothma, with Leia Organa Solo in those movies, trying to navigate the New Republic into a brighter future? Why couldn't we have gotten lightsaber duels and big bombastic space battles amongst the kind of savvy writing that Andor offers? It feels like Star Wars has to play it safe and therefore fail with its main characters, with its big galaxy upending events, but it can colour outside the lines and be truly great with its smaller plot lines and stories. And hey, if we get a show as good as Andor out of all of that, then it's still worth it. But doesn't it feel like such a shame for anyone else? The Disney era should have been set entirely post-Return of the Jedi, in the First Order / New Republic era, building up the threats and the problems and the characters of that time. Not jumping around constantly, retreading the Empire whilst letting the might of the First Order feel pathetic and hollow. It all should have been crafted with the kind of singular vision that Andor has. Star Wars doesn't need to be Andor to be good, to be quote-unquote grown up, to have depth and juicy themes and great dialogue and tragic arcs. This could have all occurred for the next generation of Skywalkers and all the people touched by those stories. I am so excited for Andor Season 2, and I am certain it's going to be a banger, but man, where does Star Wars go after it's finished? They should be giving Gilroy the keys to the kingdom, a blank check to throw Star Wars into strange new territory, but also to keep it focused, to build out one single time period rather than seeing everything thrown at the wall across multiple decades constantly. I think its best bet now is to go further and further into the future, forget the sequels and their stakes in the ground, and give us an epic cinematic trilogy with the Force and all the familiar staples, but to be bold and dare to give us something different like what Andor has done, to colour outside the lines, to push the universe and the boundary of its stories forward. That is the only way this franchise will have any hope to survive. If you want to see me review Andor Season 2 week to week, arc to arc, then be sure to check the fully filmed and fully released Full Fat podcast on the second channel. In the meantime, you can catch weekly reviews of Daredevil Born Again and Doctor Who Series 2 before Andor premieres on April 22nd. Head on over in the description or pinned comment for more. A huge thank you to Dr. Chike and Peter Vaughan for being my full fat patrons. Your contribution to keeping the channel running is immeasurable. If you'd like to join the Patreon for exclusive goodies, early releases of main videos, the podcast, video scripts, and a thank you in the credits, then please head on over to patreon.com/fullfatvideos to choose one of the paid tiers.